So, one of the things we love to do here on this podcast is really hone in on astrological hotspots, times where the astrology is something to pay attention to. And we have several things happening in January that we wanted to bring your awareness to. First of all, it's always nice to have a heads up. When we are aware of the energies, then we can kind of make plans for it. It's like when you're aware of the weather, you can decide if you want to bring an umbrella or if you want to have that party outside. That's one reason. But the second reason is it's a great way to learn astrology, because when you have an astrologer interpreting transits and then you actually get to experience the transits and live through them and pay attention to what's happening in the world, it's just a very visceral, embodied way to learn about the energetic signatures of these planetary beings and then also their movements. So with us here today, we have master astrologer Rick Levine to talk with us about the astrology surrounding the inauguration dates in the United States. Now, we're going to talk about the astrology of Inauguration Day, but what's more important is sort of the bigger picture cycles that we're in the midst of experiencing. Rick, welcome to the Astrology Hub podcast. We always love having you here. Thanks for joining us.
And I always love being here.
All right.
Even if you call me master astrologer, I've just a quick aside. I hate that. You know why?
Why?
It's fine. I mean, I'm honored and I'm touched that people think that. But the reason why I don't like that is because there are so many other astrologers who don't have that on their name thing before their name, and yet they are masters too. I'm one of many, and somehow it always makes me feel like there's something that makes it different, or I don't know.
Yeah, maybe masterful would be better, because there's many
like
masterful astrologers. You are one of many masterful astrologers.
Or maybe just an astrologer who's full of it. I don't know.
We could go with that too. Rick, I know that Saturn is a big player of what we're going to be talking about. And I always think of mastery and I think of Saturn and these things kind of going together. So maybe in some ways it is a little bit relevant, but why don't you just start
Okay, and in the spirit of full disclosure, excuse me for interrupting again, anyone who knows my chart knows that I don't have the easiest relationship with Saturn. So maybe maybe this is more my problem than yours or anyone else's out there. And I'm sorry we spent so much time on it. Let's get down to business.
Let's get down to business. Okay, it's okay. We love your tangents, Rick, so it's all good. All right, let's talk about it. So I know you want to hone in on the astrology around the inauguration, but also anchor us in a bigger storylines that are in the midst of unfolding.
Yeah, and true to my ill-earned reputation, the most important thing that about January 20th, which is at noon, that is the moment of inauguration. But the most important thing about January 20th is January 26th.
Okay.
And maybe January 2nd, and maybe not until May, June, and July of this year. I mean, it's an important day, obviously, in the United States. And it's important enough in the United States that it's important for people all over the world. The fact that we are inaugurating a new president that has already been a president who has established, whether you're for him or against him, has established a lot of extreme reaction. And after 4 years of, again, a president, whether you're for him or against him, not my issue today, but whether you are a fan or an opponent or an absolute diehard supporter or an absolute hater of Biden, during those 4 years, there was at least a surface attempt to ameliorate some of the extremism, whether you were for or against Trump's actions as president. And now we're going back to almost like finishing up what was started 8 years, is it 8 years ago? I guess, when Donald Trump first became president. And that in itself as a statement of not only United States politics, but global politics. I mean, just on the day that we are recording, Justin Trudeau is resigning today or has already resigned. It's just another piece of this larger, back and forthness that's going on. And although we can and we will look at the horoscope or the exact planetary positions at noon on January 20th, which is the designated moment of the presidential inauguration, give or take a few minutes usually, it's important to understand that this moment is occurring in the middle of three very significant nearby astrology transits that involve Saturn, Pluto, and Mars in particular in various combinations. And Jupiter, in fact, is also in that mix. And of course, anyone who's been listening to Astrology Hub over the last days, weeks, months, even year or so, knows that 2024, 2025, 2026 is perhaps the most statistically unusual year. I consider myself an astrological minimalist. Every month, every astrologer on the planet goes, oh my God, this is the most amazing new moon ever, because every year it's like, this year is it and whatever. And I'm always the one that somehow minimalizes things because things always occur as part of cycles. However, having said that, Pluto moving into Aquarius, 2025, the first year that Pluto is in Aquarius for the entirety of the year, not wobbling back and forth between Capricorn and Aquarius. And that's been talked to death or to life over the last couple of years here and everywhere else on astrology channels on the internet. But we have the four outermost planets, Pluto being the furthest out, and I say outermost, I mean within the realms of the planets that most astrologers use regularly. But Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, the four outermost planets, are all changing signs in 24, 25, 26. And it's statistically rare for them to change signs so close to one another in time. But it's not, it has happened before. But going back at least 3,000 years that many historically oriented astrologers that I know have, we've never had the condition where Saturn, but in a particularly Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, have all changed signs, and they're all trining and sextiling one another by exact degrees. And so, we have Pluto now in air sign Aquarius, and by March, we'll have Neptune moving into fire sign Aries, fire sign, air signs, sextile. We'll have Saturn also moving right along with Neptune into Aries from Pisces. And then later in the year, in July of this year, we have Uranus moving from Taurus, where it's been for 7 years, into Gemini, making a trine with Pluto. And the Uranus-Pluto cycle is one of the most basic fundamental cycles of cultural, social, political shifts that is every century and a half, depending upon how fast or slow Pluto is moving during that period of time. But their last conjunction was the astrological defining significance of what we refer to as the 1960s, because Uranus and Pluto lined up like a new moon. That was the seed in 1964-65 that we felt from 1960 to all the way through maybe 1971-72 when things began to quiet down. And then it was the Uranus-Pluto squares in the 2010s that came to a height at their exactness in 2012 through 2015, when we had Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street and gay marriage became legalized, and Ferguson, Missouri in the United States, that was a resurgence of the whole racial, civil unrest, and just all these things came back into conflict that were originated in the 60s. And as Pluto moves into Aquarius, and as Uranus moves into Gemini, they're going to be making a trine for the first time since the 60s, which is kind of like a flowing of the energy. Uranus, the planet of shock, awe, surprise, revolution. I mean, remember, it was, Uranus and even Uranus-Pluto that was like during, the, American Revolution, the wars of 1812, this is not just about physical war. It's about upheaval culturally. And yet this trine between Uranus and Pluto, which even now we're already feeling it's already within 2 degrees, of being exact. But it's not matching up with what we're seeing in this extreme intensity of bifurcation, of extreme polarity is maybe a better word, or an easier word to wrap our minds around. And so what is going on now that is causing such a struggle and a ripple in this larger scenario that takes us all the way through 2026, 27, 28, that has Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, even Jupiter, all making harmonious, flowing relationships with one another that we've never seen. And then we add to that the fact that Saturn, which has been in Pisces for a couple of years now and will be moving into Aries in May, and Neptune, which has been in Pisces for 14 years, which is moving into Aries in March, these two planets are already very close together. And by midsummer, actually by September, they'll be within 1/10 they'll be like really, really close by actually July, August, September. And even the Uranus-Pluto by September of this year will be like really, really close, like less than 1/4 of a degree close, but they don't really perfect until 2026. So we're at this point where we all feel, what's the word? Ill at ease. We feel, like the positive ions that make bugs go crazy before a storm. We know that there's a storm on the horizon. And remember, storms are not necessarily a bad thing. Why? Because storms take natural tension and resolve it. Sometimes the resolution creates some immediate disturbances. And that's what we're feeling right now, is this rattling of our senses, because we know something's around the next corner and we don't know what it is.
Wow. Okay, so you've given us a big lay of the land, but let's hone in on January, specifically the hot spots that we're paying attention to and what cycles they're related to.
So, like I said, there are 3 closer moving, faster moving planetary cycles that we're in the middle of right now. The one that's the most recent that we've just experienced, the second of the 3 of them, is on January 2nd, we had Mars opposing, retrograde Mars opposing Pluto. Now remember, Mars is the planet of war, which is not just fighting. It's Mars is about establishing healthy boundaries. Mars is the planet of direction. People think of it as the male planet, because it's the circle with the arrow on it. It's going somewhere. It's a sperm heading toward an egg. Mars is dressed up, ready to go. And if someone is in its space, it will want to engage with that person, whether it's defending its homeland or whether it's aggressing or asserting or aggressing into someone else's space. That's Mars, the god of war. Pluto, as we know, is the lord of the underworld. And the underworld is everything that's hidden. It's not everything, it's not just everything underground. And in ancient times, of course, underground was wealth. Because if you owned something underground, that meant you owned gold, silver, copper, tin, diamonds. That was where real wealth was owning those things that were hidden underground. It wasn't in currency or coins. In fact, a plutocracy, which is, some people would say, our form of government in the United States, is a government not of the wealthy, but of the wealthy, so wealthy that the wealth and the structure is hidden, because Pluto is hidden as if it was underground. And so when Mars, let me just say one other thing about that whole underground. We know since the Freudian Jungian revolution in Western psychology philosophy, we know that the metaphysical underground is the unconscious, that Pluto is that which is not what's on the surface. In fact, all the planets outside of Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, all have something to do with those invisible realities. So Mars, in its dance with Pluto, often fires up impulsive, Mars words, conflict or engagement, Mars words, with those energies that are incredibly powerful, Pluto, domineering even Pluto, but are not necessarily in the open. They're hidden, whether they're unconscious or whether they're just secret. And so when we have Mars opposite Pluto, we get this conflict in a tug of war between these two energies. The first of 3 times, because of Mars's retrograde motion, the first of the 3 current Mars-Pluto oppositions was on, give or take a day, depending upon where you live on the planet, was on November 3rd, 2 days prior to our presidential election here in the United States. And that Mars-Pluto opposition was very, very instrumental in the dynamics of what's going on, or what was going on, in American politics. The second of those 3 oppositions, now that Mars has turned retrograde, was on January 2nd or 3rd, again, depending upon where you are on the planet. That energy is with us all the way through. I mean, even up toward the end of January, Mars and Pluto, will still be in opposition, but by 6, 7, 8 degrees, but they'll still be opposed one another, because they're going to come back for a third and final opposition once Mars retrogrades, finishes its retrograde cycle, turns direct. And as it then turns direct, moves back into Leo after backing up into Cancer, that third and final Mars opposition to Pluto will be on April 26th. That in itself suggests to me that this dance of power struggle with hidden forces, whatever direction, wherever they may lie, can't play through in its finality until we get to the other side of this third one. Now, these are cycles. They have no beginnings and no endings, but often the local outbreaks of whatever the symptomology is feels like this is tied to this is tied to that. We get that, the 3 strikes and you're out comes from obviously baseball, but in astrology, it's often you get a direct retrograde direct over, over an aspect. And so it takes 3 passes for something to really finalize and either work out or not work out. So that Mars-Pluto opposition, even though it's beginning to wane by the end of the month, is part of the energy that we're all feeling right now. This conflict, this tinderbox feeling like the wrong word or lighting a match in the wrong place could just explode the entire thing. I mean, that's one of the feelings that's going on out there, regardless of what your individual horoscope is.
And this could be manifesting in people's lives individually, right? This is not
in
just
relationship issues, certainly.
Right.
It's manifested if you look around, around the beginning of January, the number of disasters, accidents, mass killings, flooding. I mean, right now there's crazy, deep snow and flooding throughout England and places that don't normal. I mean, again, we always get strange weather. We always get, airplane crashes and or unfortunately even mass killings of various sorts. But the one that happened just recently in New Orleans is like a Mars-Pluto opposition-like event. And I'm not saying one caused the other. I'm saying that energetically there's a synchronicity between those events that actually have to do with a Mars aggression, assertion, act of violence with Pluto, something coming out from underneath somewhere, some hidden anger, resentment, rage, something that comes out that would cause a person to do that. And there's a third one of these yet to follow. So I'm just saying that whatever's going on right now is in that context, even though we astrologers that talk about what happens day by day may not focus on that around the inauguration, that energy is at play.
Okay, so it started November 3rd. It had another moment January 2nd. It's going to have its final act April 26th. This is Mars-Pluto.
This is Mars-Pluto. And again, remember, they're Mars-Pluto connections, not just by opposition, but by conjunction and square. I mean, that go back to the Palestinian invasion or attack on Israel and so on. So these are parts of larger repeating cycles.
So we have Mars-Pluto covered. You said there's a couple other.
Well, there's another important Pluto thing.
Right.
And that is maybe a more serious one that most astrologers don't notice, even though most astrologers have focused on Mars opposition Pluto. The second one is Saturn-Pluto, but it's a half square. Many astrologers use zodiacal aspects based upon Ptolemy that have to do with the circle's divisions by, numbers that go into 12. So we have an opposition, a half of a circle, signs opposite each other, or a trine, a third of a circle, or a square, a quarter of a circle. Well, a half of a quarter is an eighth, or a half square, or a semi-square. Now, this is a significantly important aspect in an entire school of astrology that originated in the early 1900s in Germany, called the Hamburg School, that prompted or that created both cosmobiology and Uranian astrology, two specific branches, even symmetrical astrology, which is a more modern variation on that. And for that matter, even vibrational astrology, all understand that this division by 8 is just as important as a division by 4, even though most astrologers don't use half squares, or sesqui, 1.5 square and a halves. Incidentally, the semi-square and sesqui-square was first proposed, discovered, invented, you choose, by Johannes Kepler. He's the guy who created the semi-square, labeled it, and described it. So this Saturn-Pluto cycle, which is roughly a 32 to 38 year cycle, like a new moon is every, 29 days, 30 days, that when Saturn goes around once in 29, 30 years, Pluto's moved a bit further along, depending upon whether Pluto's moving slowly or fast, slowly or quickly. It takes about 32 to 38 years for Saturn to catch back up to Pluto, creating like a new moon, a seed. That seed of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction cycle was planted on January 12th, 2020. Within 12 hours of the laboratory in Wuhan announcing the genome and the first mortality of what later became known as COVID-19. Now, it's not that event, but it's the after effect of that event that has its significance, just like the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in August of 1914 occurred within 5 days of Duke Ferdinand being assassinated in Serbia that kicked off World War I over the next few months. In other words, these are the new moons. Like new moons, they're the alignments. They're the seed period. Or we could look at the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in August of 1947, within a week of India basically being liberated from the British Empire, and the Pakistan-India partition created, that then, of course, resulted in the ensuing battles over Kashmir that killed up to 500,000 people over the next couple of years. But there was that event of the Mahatma Gandhi's, peaceful revolution that created that liberation of India, and also the events within 6 months to a year before and after each of these conjunctions. In 1947, we also have the formation of the United Nations and the disappearance of Palestine and the creation of Israel in 1948. These are all part of that same cycle. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning that is that the half squares that a lot of astrologers don't notice, again, because of the retrograde of Saturn to slower moving Pluto, it happens 3 times. In this most closest cycle, I should also mention that the Saturn-Pluto opposition in the fall of 2001 was very closely associated with the World Trade Tower bombing. They're not all bad news, though. I mean, there have been intellectual breakthroughs. There have been major peace treaties. These are just things that just popped into my head. But that's a deeper dive. I have a whole YouTube on this that's on my YouTube channel, on my, of concern, or the, currently relevant, if people want to dig deeper on that. But in this most recent little clash between Saturn and Pluto, which again happens 3 times, direct, retrograde, direct, the first direct happened on May 6th of 2024. That was the day that the Israeli IDF basically made its major incursion into Rafah. I mean, there had been fighting and stuff going on, but that was the day that everyone was waiting for Israel to respond for real, so to speak. And that was on the day of the Saturn-Pluto half square, May 6th. On the day of the retrograde half square, which I had the date here, I think it was the September 25th. And that was within a few days of this incredible full moon eclipse, that this Saturn-Pluto half square was already within like minutes of being exact, because these are slower moving planets. And on that eclipse, on that day, that was the day that the pagers exploded in Lebanon, which again was an Israeli assertion of their, boundary. Saturn, boundary. Saturn is structure. Saturn is physical reality. Pluto is the coming up from the underworld and the transmutation. In other words, you have a caterpillar with boundaries, and somehow a butterfly emerges, and those boundaries morph so that one becomes the other. And often with Pluto-Saturn connections, we see direct engagements of either religious or cultural or legal or ideological, philosophical, the whole Copernican revolution, the sun being the center of our little neighborhood here, not the Earth. These are all tied to Saturn-Pluto, the Saturn-Pluto dance. And so this Saturn-Pluto is often tied to religious, cultural, national boundary, disengagement, re-engagement. I mean, it's tied to things like the Spanish-American War, where Spain was kicked out of most of the, the Philippines and Cuba. It's tied to, other colonial interactions where there was strong realignments of boundaries. Okay, So the third and final of these Saturn-Pluto half squares in this little current, kind of brush fire of this very deep, energy occurs just a few days after the inauguration. It's exact on January 26th. Inauguration is on January 20th. On inauguration date, I'm looking this way because I have the chart on my other screen. On inauguration date, the Saturn-Pluto half square or semi-square is basically less than a half a degree from being exact.
Hey there, I hope you're loving this episode, and we're gonna get right back to it. But before we do, I wanted to take a moment to extend a rare and fascinating invitation your way. Now, Rick and many astrologers have been talking about how we are now at a critical point in human history. With massive changes on the horizon, we're being asked to expand our perception and our consciousness. Now, of course, astrology is very helpful in doing this, but I was especially intrigued when UK-based astrologer Steve Judd brought in the role that crop circles may be playing in our expansion of awareness. Astrology shows us the patterns and cycles impacting our life, while crop circles provide profound, unexplained messages etched in the earth itself. And Steve asserts that together, they create a gateway to understanding the bigger picture and our role in it. If this piques your curiosity, consider joining us for a live webinar event happening on January 13th, where Steve Judd will share, for the first time ever, photographs, videos, research, and his own commentary on the mysterious messages written in the earth that he's been studying for over 30 years. Go to astrologyhub.com/crop circles to join us for this live event. And if you're tuning in after January 13th, or you can't make the live webinar time, you can still get access to the recordings, the slide decks, the transcripts, and any supplemental materials after January 13th. Just go to astrologyhub.com/crop circles. We'll also drop that link into the show notes. I do hope to see you there. Now back to the episode.
And then there's the third and final thing that's not so much in January, but we're feeling it in January. And that refers to the larger Jupiter-Saturn cycle, which is a conjunction cycle. That's like the new moon. I say new moon in as much as a new moon is the seed for the next cycle that comes to fruition at the full moon, but at the first quarter and third quarter moon, there's conflict, and there's other conflicts within the halves of those also. And again, this is the origin of our calendar. A month, a fortnight, which is half of a month, and a week, which is a half of a fortnight. These are all basic calendar functions. But with the Saturn, Pluto, this particular cycle gets stirred up. And this third and final time being at the end of January is suggesting that there's deeper stuff there. And that's that half square. But back to the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, there, Jupiter and Saturn had their new moon it has it on even numbered decades, meaning that there's, again, tied to our calendar, we had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Jupiter moving faster than Saturn, coming into conjunction with Saturn in 1900, 1920, 1940, 1960, 1980, 2000. Actually, it was early 2001, and then 2020. Actually, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in December of 2020 was considered and talked about here on the Astrology Hub as more important than a 20-year cycle, because it was part of what Kepler determined is called a grand mutation, which happens rarely when that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction changes elements. And I don't want to dig deeper into that, but that occurred in late December of 2020. We are now at the halfway point between that conjunction, the new moon part of that cycle, and the oppositions that always occur on odd-yeared decades. The last one, 2010, the next one, 2030. Here at the end of 2024 into 2025, we have a Jupiter-Saturn square. Jupiter is expansive. Saturn is contractive. Jupiter and Saturn, in many ways, are the social regulators. The ancients knew nothing about anything out past Saturn, and for them, Jupiter and Saturn, that cycle was it. In fact, when Jupiter joined up with Saturn every 20 years, that was referred to as the king star. In fact, it's likely that the Star of Bethlehem, according to Kepler's calculations, was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in a grand mutation in its conjunction in Pisces in, a few years, I think, 4, 5, or 6 BC, because our calendar is off because the Pope appointed an idiot to make the calendar. Oh, and little things like he didn't realize there was a year 0 because there is none in Roman numerals. And he also didn't realize that Octavius and Augustus were the same person. And so he lost a few years, and so his calculations are off. But the point is that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction is this expansion. Think the 1920s. 30s, depression, quiet. 40s, world wars, expansion. 50s, quiet. 60s, crazy. 70s, quiet. 80s, something's going on again. 90s, quiet. 2000s, expansion. 2010s, pulling in. Now in the 2020s, we're in this expansion mode again. But we're at that square point where there's a dynamic conflict between the expansion, Jupiter, the big thinking, the philosophical ideas, the open mind, the liberal, the blue, the everything's okay, and Saturn, the contractive, which is not negative because without contraction, there's no physical substance. Saturn is what holds things together. Saturn pulls things in. Saturn goes back to the past, which sometimes may be good because if we leave the past too quickly, we have no grounding in who we are and what we're doing in our history and so on. But we're at that point where we're at this dynamic conflict, square engagement between Jupiter, Saturn, expand, contract. I always call this the cycle of peristalsis, one of my favorite words, which is when you swallow, your esophagus makes alternating expansions and contractions that moves the food down through not only the esophagus, but even through the intestines. When you see a snake with a bulge in it, that bulge moves down as it's being digested by peristalsis, alternating waves of Jupiter, Saturn, expansion, contraction. So the Jupiter-Saturn square process is really important in all of this because in some ways it was one of the factors feeding the process of Biden's resignation, Kamala Harris coming into the scene, the dynamic craziness between these 2 points of view, and the first of the 3 expansive, opportunistic, growth-oriented, spend money. This is Jupiter. It's optimism. It's everything's going to be okay. The first square, Saturn, wait a minute, let's get real. Let's be responsible. Let's make strong boundaries. Let's tighten things up so that we can hold our shit together. That's Saturn. And there's no right, wrong here. There's no judgment. In fact, Jupiter without Saturn is Neptune. Because Jupiter expands, but it always has to answer to Saturn. You can only blow up a balloon so far and then it pops. That's Saturn. That's the limit. Neptune, on the other hand, has no limit. It goes forever. It dreams. It's not real until it's pulled in and becomes Saturnian. Okay, so the first of these dynamic conflicts, and this is not about a date. These are about a process over months. The first of this square between expansion, contraction, between let's go anywhere into the future, let's hold on to what we have, or even pull back into the past to make something real, was in mid-August of 2024. The second of these 2 was on Christmas Eve on December 24th. We're still really close to that right now. In fact, even during the presidential inauguration at the end of January. They're still within a few degrees of being exact, but they're growing further and further apart. And the third and final Jupiter-Saturn square is June 15th, which means on some level, it's not going to be until June, even July, when Uranus moves into Gemini and things change again. What's going on now are the interference patterns of this Mars-opposed Pluto, of the Saturn half square to Pluto, and the Jupiter square to Saturn. These three events are all what's creating or being manifest as the I'm discouraged, I'm disappointed, things are not right, something's going wrong. And yet, these deeper, slower moving rhythms that are almost like a bass note that we can't quite hear, oddly enough, even in the midst of all of this, when you talk with people, people are hopeful. There's like, I get this is what just happened. I get that there's a tinderbox of war or genocide going on here and here and here and here. And oh my God, don't humans ever learn anything? And I'm so discouraged and disappointed at all of us. And yet at the same time, there's this, but I think something's going to happen. Whether it's AI, AR, or ET, or none of the above, or all of the above, that's, I think, part of what the inauguration is. It happens within. Now, on Inauguration Day, which is roughly, I say roughly, it's on January 20th, but it's roughly at noon. And when the actual I do or whatever, the recitation of the I accept or whatever those words are, the moment is usually, it's right around noon on January 20th. And on that day, there are some things that are of interest. First of all, as we know and we've talked about, you've talked about with dozens of astrologers about Pluto's move into Aquarius and how the last time Pluto was in Aquarius, we had little occurrences like the creation of the American Constitution, and the first Continental Congress and the first the setting up, the creation of the American judicial system, the American Revolution, and the French Revolution. The realization that electricity was in our nervous systems, whether it was Benjamin Franklin flying a kite or Galvani, prodding a dead frog with electrodes and watching the legs twitch and going, oh my gosh, our nervous system is electrical. Electricity was a new energy then, and this was all part of the social realignment and technological breakthroughs of 248 years ago when Pluto was moving through Aquarius. Now Pluto's in Aquarius, but you know what? This is the first presidential inauguration with the sun conjoining Pluto in Aquarius, because the Sun-Pluto conjunction is perfected on January 21st. But at the moment, on noon of January 20th, the Sun-Pluto conjunction is about 3/4 of a degree from being exact, and it's moving toward closer. Astrologically, we say applying, and an applying aspect is stronger because the energy is growing rather than dissipating. So Trump will be inaugurated with Sun conjoined Pluto, meaning the light of consciousness, the willpower, the sun, the intensity of the fuel of our furnace here that gives us life is lighting up what? It's lighting up the underworld. Now, the underworld or the hell realms is not a place where we go to get punished. It's not a Judeo-Christian hell realms. If you do this, you're going to get punished. It's a place of ultimate transformation. It's deconstruction, reconstruction. It's not just about death, because in nature, there's no such thing as death without rebirth. And so the sun lining up with Pluto is a symbol for the light of awareness shining in the darkness. And of course, any Jungian psychologist, or most psychologists, regardless of their discipline, will acknowledge that which you don't know can and does in fact hurt you. But when you become aware of something, even if it's awful, once you're aware of it, you can engage it. You can make a plan to encounter it or to defend from it or even avoid it. But knowing what it is, what's that saying? The devil you know is better than the devil you don't, you know? And in a way, this is what this is culturally what we're facing, not only now as Pluto moves into Aquarius and the sun aligns with it, but literally for the last, well, since the alignment of Neptune and Pluto in the late 1800s, culture has been moving through this gradual thing of delving further and further into the archetypal, symbolic, imaginal, metaphysical. I mean, you've heard me say this before, 300 years ago, he said, "Oh, nice to see you. It's nice that we're here." Okay, now we say it's nice that we're here. Where is here? We're on opposite sides of the planet, you and I right now, right. And yet there is a here that is non-physical. And we as a culture, we don't think about things like this, but we've been moving gradually and now faster and faster. Part of this was highlighted by the Saturnian restriction when Saturn moved into Aquarius and prevented people from moving around. We had to go to Aquarius, to electronic digital realms and Zoom to make connections with others. And now, of course, Saturn has moved on, but Pluto now in Aquarius is basically bringing up another round of this hidden stuff that has been in the unconscious, in the hell realm, so to speak. And while the light of the sun is being shined on it, partly in this inauguration process, we can't help but see what's in the darkness. It's like it only takes one candle in a cave to light the whole damn cave. And it doesn't matter how many people look at it. The light doesn't diminish. The light is there. And what we're seeing here, and different people are seeing different things. There's no question about that, because we have Saturn approaching Neptune, the planet of reality and the planet of imagination, over the next months and even over the next year, will continue getting closer and closer and closer together, at which time there will be some things that will occur that on one hand will be a solidification of what is real, and on the other hand, it will be the awareness that everything is real is really just part of a bigger dream. Both at once. How this will play out individually, physically, astrologers will be talking about that for the next few years.
Rick, I am going to attempt to highlight some of the main things that we talked about here today, because it's this convergence of lots of things coming together that makes the storyline very interesting for this inauguration time period in January of 2025. Yeah. So the first of which, you started out talking about how we're in the midst of a bigger turning point, 2024, 2025, 2026, into 2027, 28, but really these 3 years of 24 to 26, where all of the outer planets are changing signs. Not only are they changing signs, but then they're starting to make sextiles and trines to each other. So this is historically something that we haven't experienced before in modern human history.
In recorded human history.
Recorded human history, even more significant.
And also never with the technology that we have, which is a huge piece of this. We can have a deep dive on that part of the conversation some other time.
Right. So the technology unifying us in some ways, that one event happening in one part of the world can be immediately known about in another part of the world, et cetera. Okay. Yes, that would be a fun deep dive. Okay. So that's happening, and that's extraordinarily statistically rare and maybe never happened before. Okay. Then in January, we have 3 significant cycles hitting significant events in their cycles. So we have Mars and Pluto opposition, that we already had this happening on January 2nd.
Correct.
The midpoint of this, though. So Mars-Pluto opposition, the second of 3 happened January 2nd. Then we have Saturn-Pluto semi-squares, and the final of those happening on January 12th.
January 26th.
January 26th. Thank you.
Right. Just a few. The inauguration will be feeding into that first week of Trump's presidency,
Right.
whether it's because of him or other things. It's likely we'll see a lot of these things kind of over the next week or so after that, or even the days coming into it. Again, these are not necessarily timed to a moment, but
Right.
yeah, January 26th, the second on that.
There we go. And then we have another.
I'm sorry, the third. That's the third on that.
Third, the final,
you said correct.
right? And then we have another second of three, a two of three, which is the Jupiter-Saturn square.
Actually, the second of three occurred on Christmas Eve.
Okay, so but we're still in that energy.
We're still in that energy, and we won't be done with that conflict between that breathing in and out, that expansion, contraction, peristalsis. We won't be done with that until later in the summer. The exact date, I think, was June.
You said June, July.
June 15th. June 15th is the exact third perfection. But again, this is a slower moving process.
Right. So you said all of those things together, those three things together are potentially contributing to anyone, if you're feeling out there sort of discouraged, disappointed, on edge, like something's about to happen. You're not feeling the trine energy that we talked about earlier. You're feeling more of like a tense energy. That's because of those three things all coming together at the same time. The thing that you also said is that you may also, underneath that discouragement or disappointment or on edgeness, you might be feeling a little bit of hopefulness as well. And that is potentially in anticipation of these trines and sextiles that we're about to be experiencing in a bigger way. But these faster moving planets are making it so there's a little bit more of a disturbance in the field.
By the way, that hopefulness can also be a feeling of, why bother doing anything? Nothing I do is going to matter anyhow, because intuitively we know that things by late 25, 26, 27, 28, somehow they're going to be set. And I have to say, I don't think that anyone is going to be thoroughly happy by how things are set. And I don't think anyone is going to be thoroughly discouraged, because I think that there's going to be things that are going to go this way and or that way, but we're going to have less freedom of movement and expression that has potential impact on the future than we do now. And I say now, meaning late 24 into 25 and through this summer or so. This is why my Think Cosmically, Act Locally is more important than it's ever been, because what we do in little ways now is feeding the larger picture. I mean, I've said this before, and I'll say it here very briefly, and that is, if you'd asked me 6 months ago, who you're voting for, I would have had an opinion, and I would have talked to you about my opinion. These days, I don't give a crap who you voted for. We're all in this together, and we're either going to get out of it together, or none of us are going to get out of it. And we're going to slowly realize that it doesn't matter what the external power structure is, who the president is, or whatever. No one's going to be fully happy, and no one's going to be fully unhappy based upon what it is that unfolds. And we have to figure out a way to, I'm going to make up a word, unbifurcate. What's that? It's to, in some ways, we need to figure out a way to relieve the tension of and or stress of what it is we're feeling. And again, just in closing here, I want to just come back to the presidential election just for the inauguration just for a moment, because on Inauguration Day, Mercury is squaring Chiron, within a degree. And this is, and the moon is also squaring Mercury and opposing Chiron. And there's this sense of wanting to find balance with the moon in Libra. And with Mercury and Chiron, we can't help but say it the way it is. And it's squaring Chiron. We think that telling the truth is going to help and heal. But I think whatever words are spoken on that day are just going to make things a bit more disruptive, because Mercury is squaring Chiron, where I'm going to look at you and see you as so different, and I'm going to try to say something that'll help you see the truth, and it'll just piss you off even more. And then you're going to come back and do the same to me. I don't mean you personally, but I think that that's going to be an underlying local event of the moon in Libra squaring Mercury in Capricorn, opposing Chiron in Aries on Inauguration Day. And Chiron is moving closer and closer to Eris this year in 2025. And on Inauguration Day, Mars, which has just kind of gradually pulling away from its second of 3 oppositions to Pluto, Mars is exactly, when I say exactly, I mean at noon, it's perfected. It's same degree, same minute. Mars at 24 degrees, 24 minutes of Cancer, retrograde, is squaring Eris, 24 degrees Aries and 24 minutes. Now, Mars and Eris have a mythological connection. They're siblings. Eris is Mars's sister. And Eris is not afraid. She's known as the sower of discord because she's not afraid of throwing a little bit of something disruptive into the crowd just to watch what's going to happen. Now, the truth is that Eris has a higher calling because often the disorder or chaos or disruption that's created by Eris often shows what needs to be somehow reintegrated. And with Mars, I mean, not closely, but exactly squaring Eris at the moment of this inauguration, I don't even need to put more words to it. It's we got 2 cosmic badasses that are 90 degrees from one another, that are in a sibling rivalry of which one can stir up more trouble. One in Cancer retrograde, holding the energy in and protecting the homeland, Mars in Cancer. I'm not going to hurt anyone, but I'm going to mess up anyone who tries to hurt me, so to speak. I mean, in other words, Mars in Cancer traditionally is considered to be debilitated. It's because it's opposite its favorite place to be. When Mars is not at home in Aries, its favorite place to be is in Capricorn because it finishes what it starts. In Cancer, the patriarchal view of colonialistic astrology looks at Mars in Cancer as a bit of a wimp because it's not interested in starting wars and beating the crap out of weaker people. But you mess with its mother or its home or its family or its children, and it's Mars. It's going to be Mars. And so we have Mars in some way now saying, I'm not interested in starting any wars, but don't mess with us. That's Mars in Cancer. But it's squaring Eris in Mars's home sign of Aries, basically saying, let's just see what happens if we do this. How's this going to play out? I don't know, but I find the aspects intriguing, along with the fact that on Inauguration Day, actually it's perfected the day before, but we have Venus conjoining Saturn also. And this is a bit of kind of like, are relationships worth it? Is any engagement and is being nice worth it? Is this really what I'm getting worth what I'm feeling? I'm attached to Venus. Venus loves being in Pisces. She's exalted there. You know, that is her favorite place to be when she's not at home, you know, in Taurus or Libra. But she's just met up with Saturn, who's the ultimate authority, who says, can't have what you want yet. You know, maybe you'll get it, but not today. And so what does all this mean? I'll let you know the week or two after inauguration, but it's a pretty intense little local stirring up. And again, just coming back to the fact that the sun is conjoining Pluto in Aquarius for the first time, shining a light on all this hidden stuff. And remember, this hidden stuff, Aquarius is the sign of technology, Elon Musk. Whoops. But there's this whole thing of, remember, Elon Musk's partner in PayPal was Peter Thiel, who is basically the person that put J.D. Vance, you know, where he is. There's this whole piece of the sun shining its light into that darkness. What is that going to mean? I don't know. But we have Saturn half squaring it, saying these boundaries ain't quite done being fought over. What does that mean? We'll see it as it unfolds.
Mm. Okay, Rick, you have given us an incredible download. I didn't realize how many different things are coming together because we have these bigger things, plus we have the faster moving planets doing interesting things. So it will be, time will tell.
As it often does.
As it often does. I love it that you know our beloved Natasha Alter, the astrologer who I had my first reading with. We sometimes joke, she'll say, I'll ask her a question and she'll say,
the astrologer who first connected me to you, by the way.
yes, true, that too. She'll jokingly will say, we'll know more in 2 weeks than we know now. It's like one of these profound but not profound statements. Like, of course, we'll know more in 2 weeks. So that is something we will know more in 2 weeks than we know right now. And Rick, thank you for giving us this lay of the land, because I think it's not only helpful for January, but it's helpful to anchor ourselves in these bigger cycles and to understand where we're at and to understand why astrologers are so focused on what's happening right now and why you may be feeling this unsettledness. And I know for myself, knowing that that's kind of in the air astrologically actually helps me settle it down and just go, okay, that's okay. We don't know. There's going to be things unfolding that we can't even imagine right now. So don't even try. Just see what happens. And as Rick always says, think cosmically, act locally, focus on the things you can control. Right?
Before we go, I want to say, I would like to say just a couple of quick things about things that I have coming up.
Yes.
Very, very briefly.
Of course.
First of all, as people may have heard these grumblings and rumblings, although we're still a few weeks away from making formal announcements, Steve Judd and I will be doing a weekend event the first weekend in May in London. More information on that to follow. It's going to be a cool weekend, and we got some surprises in mind for that. That's number one. Number two, as you know, I teach this 2-week retreat initiation into astrology in Goa, India, every year. I just got back from being in India for a month. Had an amazing time. The students, I mean, just a powerful, wonderful thing. I will be doing that again next year at the end of November. The reason, into the 1st of December, the reason why I'm mentioning it is that those international workshops that I do are basically produced and put together by a woman who owns a small organization called Heaven and Earth Workshops. And Heaven and Earth Workshops, if you go to heavenandearthworkshops.com and go to events, the stuff on my India workshop next year is there. But also, we're doing a special event just north of Santa Barbara in Buellton. It's on 101, just the next exit or two north of Santa Barbara. And this will be on Valentine's Day, Friday, February 14th and the 15th. And it's going to be an astrology evening of understanding relationships, not just love, but relationships from an astrological perspective on Friday evening. And then on Saturday, a deep dive in how to use astrology in your everyday life without knowing or caring that you're a Gemini or he's a Virgo or she's a this or has a moon in that. We always have astrology available to us. I call this playing with the planets in your pocket, even if you don't know that they are there. And that'll be an all-day event on Saturday. Heavenandearthworkshops.com under events. You can find that. It's going to be a fun weekend. That's going to be February 14th, 15th. And thank you for the opportunity to allowing me to share that.
Oh my God, Rick. We're going to put the links for any of these things that you do have links for. I know you and Steve don't have links for your event yet, but we'll be putting those.
I'm not supposed to say anything yet. No.
But we just did.
It's happening. Take it back. Take it back. No,
sorry, Steve. Okay. So we'll put links where we have them in the description of this video. And being in person with Rick is, if you love him on screen, you will love him even more in person. He is so incredible to be in his presence, to be able to ask him questions live. So yes, any opportunity you have to go and be with Rick is going to be a treat. And he keeps his events small. So you're going to have an opportunity to actually engage with him. And he loves to hang out and have dinner with everybody. So it's good stuff. Check that out.
For the Saturday event in Buellton, I mean, we actually have a vegetarian lunch that'll be catered as part of the day. And of course, in India, we are all in it's a Ayurvedic healing spa, a 2-minute walk from a gorgeous beach. and we have breakfast and lunch together as a group at the restaurant at the resort we stay at every day. And then dinner, we kind of go off on our own or in smaller groups. So yeah, I love being with, there are some teachers who teach and then go hide.
Right.
I got this 4 planets in the 11th house and Gemini rising. When I'm around the students or the people that are studying with me, it's like, I want to know more about them. I want to hang out. I want to play.
Yes.
For better or worse.
Oh, for better, for sure. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of our community. Thank you for tuning into this show. Thank you for liking and subscribing, for sharing episodes with your friends. It really helps us get the podcast out to more and more people. We appreciate you so much. Can't wait to catch you on the next episode. Rick, thank you for being here and giving us this incredible lay of the land. And it'll be amazing to see how this all plays out. All right. Thank you, everybody, for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode. Take care. Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Want more? Make sure you're signed up for our Cosmic Insider newsletter. It's free, delivered every Monday, includes links to all the episodes, plus you'll get a heads up on the cosmic weather ahead. Just go to astrologyhub.com/insider. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to help us reach more astrology lovers like you. And finally, follow us on socials. You can find us on Instagram, X, TikTok, or Facebook for daily astrological guidance. See you soon.